This patient just underwent or was in the process of undergoing the OAGB, and at the end we must close Peterson's defect. This video that is unedited will show you our technique to do that. We start by locating the efferent limb that you see here to the right of your screen. We locate the transverse colon and the omentum attached to it. We lift all this cranially, which opens up Peterson's defect and which in the depth will reveal the angle of Treitz. So now we're ready to perform the closure itself. We start by taking a bite on the mesentery of the efferent limb very close to the bowel. Then, again, under good visual control of the transverse colon, we place a stitch in the mesocolon itself, close to the transverse. And then from there on, we're going to go more towards the right of the patient, taking little bites in the transverse mesocolon until we reach the angle of Treitz, still in the mesocolon though. Usually we can even incorporate the ligament of Treitz, not always, but here we get to the root of the transverse mesocolon, and here you see how that flimsy ligament is being incorporated in this suture. So here's the root itself of the transverse mesocolon, where it gets its transition towards the mesentery of the small bowel. So we use barbed wire, non-resorbable, which means that we don't have to tie a knot, but we can just lock the suture as usual by placing the needle into the eye of the short suture. Again, this is unedited material, so this is real life, I should say. We tighten the stitch, making sure that we don't include fatty tissue, because the fatty tissue will melt, since the patient will obviously lose weight, and then the place where the fatty tissue is present will result into a defect that may, on its part, cause an internal hernia. Now, once we have passed the root of the transverse mesocolon, we just need to approximate the mesentery of the efferent limb and the mesentery of the small bowel. Usually this takes 2 or 3 bites, but it's important that we don't leave a gap at that level. So we have to make sure that we see actually exactly the angle of transition between the two mesenteries, and for that we have to take our time, but we usually get a good view on this, which is here, the dimple that is actually the testimonial that we reached the bottom of the defect, of Peterson's defect. So we have to make sure that the closure is tight, and again we will have a look to make sure that we did incorporate the dimple that's always there between the two mesenteries, and here you see how sometimes it's a little bit painstaking, but we need to do that for our patients' safety. So since it's barbed wire, we don't need to tie a knot, and we just have to lock the suture, which ends and this closure of Peterson's defect. However, to make sure that we didn't do anything wrong, we will, after cutting the stitch, we will check the anastomosis once again. So we will immerse the operative field in saline solution. The anesthesiologist will advance a large bore orogastric tube towards the anastomosis and will inject air to make sure that there's no leak, so there's no bubbles that will appear, but also to make sure that both limbs of the OAGB will actually fill up with air, which proves that there's no obstruction. So here, the anesthesiologist is working with the orogastric tube. We see the spleen here, and here we see that both limbs nicely fill up with air, which means that there's no obstruction. There's also no bubbles. And we still leave a drain. We've been doing that for the past 17 years. I know it makes no real sense, but why cut a good old habit? And this concludes